Okay, so today's video is going to be a little bit painful for me, but if I have to embarrass myself in order to teach you guys something, I'm all for it. So in today's video, I'm going to share with you all 10 mistakes that I've made that actually caused me some serious algae issues, and those mistakes could have easily been avoided. I'm not talking about mistakes that happened 6-7 years ago when I was still a beginner. I'm talking like a few weeks ago, a few months ago, maybe last year, all very, very recent mistakes. Now guys, before we get started on this list, let me know in the comments if I should make more algae videos on the channel. I've done a lot of algae videos like a year ago, year and a half ago. I'm not sure if it's a good idea to keep repeating the same thing over and over again. Although I do feel like a lot of people are always struggling with algae, so it doesn't hurt to make more of those videos. So let me know in the comments what you guys want to see. Okay, let's get right into it with my first mistake. This one is a little bit embarrassing. Mistake number one is that I wasn't using a CO2 drop checker. And I make sure I inject enough by using a drop checker. Get yourself a drop checker. Best way to check this is by using a drop checker. Maybe I should start listening to my own advice. Okay, so this thing right here has a little hang-on drop checker. Then on the shelf, I think none of the tanks have a CO2 drop checker. The one on top is without CO2, the big shallow is without CO2. And on this side, only the 70-liter scrapers tank has a little hang-on drop checker. It's actually nice and green, good job. So technically I should have a CO2 drop checker in every single tank that has CO2 injection. I think I'm just a bit too much of a cheapskate to keep buying more CO2 drop checkers. And my mistake is that I think I can eyeball the amount of CO2 that a tank needs. If I set up a new tank, I'll just open the needle valve, check the amount of bubbles per second or just the CO2 coming out of the diffuser and think like, okay, that should be enough for this tank. And sometimes that works, sometimes I do have enough CO2 injection. And sometimes I get black brush algae and I'm like, what's wrong? And then I put a drop checker in and like, I see, it was not enough. Okay, my second mistake was actually with the big shallow. This happened about a year ago. Mistake number two is that I set up this tank in the middle of the summer and just before holidays. You guys are looking very hungry. So like a freshly set up planted tank always requires a little bit more attention during the first few weeks. Like you might need to adjust the lighting levels, you might need to adjust the CO2 a little bit. If you're using aquasol, you might need to do a few more frequent water changes. So I got the big shallow somewhere around end of June last year. Of course I was very excited and I wanted to set it up immediately. But at the time it was already summer, temperatures were rising pretty quickly. This house warms up pretty fast as well. And if there's one thing that algae loves, it's warm water. I also went on a holiday a few weeks after I set it up. So that was just a recipe for disaster. And when I came back from holidays, there was a huge algae explosion in this aquarium. But we also have blue-green algae. As you can see here, all along the substrate line, we have blue-green algae. And there's a little bit on the carpet as well. So if you are planning to set up a new tank, I would always suggest to kind of check your agenda, see if you have any holidays or trips coming up, and wait with setting up the tank until after that. So that was mistake number two. So my third mistake actually happened with this aquarium over here, the 70-liter scrapers tank. As you can see, there's quite a big window next to it. So mistake number three is ignoring direct sunlight. I think we're all aware of the fact that sunlight can cause algae issues, but it doesn't have to. I mean, if you have a very balanced aquarium with a lot of plants, with very little waste organics and no excess nutrients, you can definitely have some sunlight in your aquarium and it shouldn't really be an issue. My mistake was thinking that I could pull it off with a new setup with a lot of aquasol that's releasing a lot of nutrients just by kind of keeping the curtains closed. But of course that's not realistic. Like at some point you're going to forget to close the curtains, and with a little bit of sunlight, you know, it doesn't have to take very long before you get algae issues. So with this aquarium I actually had a lot of algae issues in the first few weeks. But by now the aquarium is stable and a little extra sunlight doesn't really hurt this tank anymore. Okay, then we're at mistake number four. This one is absolutely ridiculous. Can't believe I did this. This one actually happened a few weeks ago. Mistake number four is reusing plants from an aquarium that already had algae issues. Yeah, I said it. So you might remember the low budget versus high budget experiment that we had going on over here. Our high budget tank was infested with green dust algae. So I took those tanks down, but that tank had some really beautiful plants that I wanted to save. And I used them in a new setup, and now that new setup was also infested with green dust algae. So yeah, that one was a little bit stupid, MJ. Mistake number five actually happened with this aquarium right here. Mistake number five is dosing too much micronutrients. Well, the actual mistake is trying to copy a fertilizer routine from a famous fertilizer brand with a different brand fertilizer that's much more concentrated. But I thought that title was a bit too long. So over here, I basically have the only 3 fertilizers that I use. So we have micronutrients, we have macronutrients, and we have potassium. Now in all my tanks, I use Aquasoil. Aquasoil already contains a ton of nutrients. So usually during the first few weeks, months, I will only dose micro and potassium. So this one will only be used after like a few weeks or so. Now the experts will know that dosing micro and potassium, that's exactly the same way as the ADA liquid fertilizer routine. So if you look up ADA liquid fertilizer routine, you will see that they will only dose micro and potassium every single day. So that is exactly what I was doing in that tank over there. But like within a few weeks, these rocks were completely green, covered in green algae, and I just couldn't figure out what was the problem. Until I started thinking like, yeah, okay, these micronutrients, like why am I dosing it every day? It's called micronutrients for a reason, like plants don't really need that much of it. So then I scaled back to only dosing micronutrients just once a week. And now these rocks are completely free of any algae, and this basically the entire tank is algae free now. Okay, we're staying on the topic of liquid fertilizer with mistake number 6. My 6th mistake was never dosing nitrates. So I just mentioned that in a new setup I will usually only dose potassium and micronutrients. And that's great because they will also really help to grow beautiful red plants. Like for example, rotalas. If you have very low nitrates in your water column, those rotalas will turn beautiful red. Absolutely amazing. But I was so like tunnel vision focused on trying to grow red plants that I completely ignored all my other plants' demands and wishes. And I wasn't dosing nitrates for months and months. So then my plants started suffering, and then I got algae issues. And if there's one type of algae that also really likes those low nitrate conditions, is blue-green algae. So I especially got some blue-green algae because I had no nitrates for a very long period of time. So that was another mistake. I think we're at number 7 right now. Yeah, mistake number 7 is using too many root taps. So I've mentioned a couple of times on the channel that I'm a big fan of using a lot of nutrients in the substrate, so I don't have to dose as much liquid fertilizers. So I always use Aquasoil, and I usually supplement the Aquasoil with root taps as well. Now usually when you buy root taps, on the label it will say like only use 1 root tap per 10 centimeters, per 15 centimeters, something like that. But for example with the 70 liter capers tank and a few of my other tanks as well, I just completely ignored that advice and just added way too many root taps. Because I thought, those root taps are going to be covered with Aquasoil, with the substrate. So those nutrients are not going to leak to the water column anyway. Not entirely true, those nutrients will definitely enter the water column and will definitely cause some unnecessary algae issues. So mistake number 7, don't use too many root taps. Okay, mistake number 8, this is one that I've made way too often myself, and I think a lot of you guys as well. Mistake number 8 is using way too much light on our tanks. I think we're all just a little bit impatient and we all want super fast plant growth. So after we plant a tank, we preferably have a full carpet within a week, amazing colors within a week. And that's why we think, okay, if I give it more light, it'll probably go a little bit faster. But in reality, it actually doesn't go faster. It just gives us more algae issues. I think the great example was the low budget versus high budget experiment that we did. So our low budget tank had a budget light with only 600 or 700 lumens. Plants still grew pretty fast and we had almost no algae issues. But our high budget tank had a super powerful light. Plants didn't grow much faster and gave us a lot of algae issues and only more problems. So I've definitely been guilty of using too much light on my tanks and I just gave myself more work. So that was mistake number 8. Okay, we're back at the big shallow again. I've made a lot of mistakes with this aquarium. Mistake number 9 has everything to do with the CO2 system from the big shallow. So in the past year or so I've been testing a fully automated CO2 system. Works with the pH sensor. So this sensor sits in the aquarium, measures the pH, and then I can tell the system which pH I want it to be. And according to that information, it will either open or close the CO2. Very interesting, very complicated as well. But the pH sensor needs to be calibrated every few months or so in order to stay accurate. And that's where lazy MJ kicks in. I'm like, I don't need to do that, that's not important. So I didn't calibrate the pH sensor for an entire year or so, I think. And that actually gave me a lot of algae issues that I just wasn't even aware of. I wasn't even aware of the fact that it was because of the pH sensor that I didn't calibrate it. I just thought that there was something else going on. So that was another very silly mistake. Okay, the last one. This is actually not really a mistake. This is more just life getting in the way. Number 10 is skipping water changes. I've definitely had my fair share of algae issues. just because I either forgot to do a water change or just because I didn't have time to do it. So usually I will do like a 50% water change once a week. Usually Saturday is kind of my maintenance day. I'll do a 50% water change on all my tanks, and it kind of keeps them nice and clean. But if I would skip a water change on these established tanks that have been up and running for months already, if I would skip 1 week, no big deal. If I will skip 2 weeks, no big deal. Maybe after 3 weeks we will start getting some algae on the glass and stuff like that. So that's not really a big deal. But for example, on the bottom shelves, we have the new experiment, reverse osmosis water versus tap water. And they both have a very fresh aquasol that's still releasing a lot of nutrients in the water column. So with those tanks, we kind of have to be religious and do a water change once a day during the first week, every other day during the second week, every 3 days during the third week, and so on and so on. On those tanks, if we would skip water changes for an entire week, we would definitely have some big issues. So trying to be on schedule with those two tanks, but sometimes life just gets in the way. Okay guys, that's it. 10 silly mistakes that caused me some unnecessary algae issues. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to smash that like button. See you next time. Take care.